Hi everyone, I'm Holly Stevens. Welcome to LSC's Data Tools session. I'm excited that you're all here and that we're here to share what we're doing. Are we ready for next slide? Yes. Thank you. First, I just wanted to think a little bit about the goals of the session. We're going to introduce ourselves. We're going to talk a little bit about ODGA. We're going to share some of our recent work. We're really at the beginning phases, so think about this just as a starting point. And then we want to learn from you. We want to hear about the projects that you're working on, the initiatives that you're undertaking, and maybe ideas on how we can be most impactful and useful to all of you. So let's get started. Thanks, Jordan. The Office of Data Governance and Analysis was formed in 2016 to help LSC and its grantees use data. To use data to inform program improvement, to use it for strategic decision making and additional outreach. There's a team of 9 researchers right now on the team, data scientists and data engineers. Today, we have Dan Bernstein, a data engineer, Logan Pratico, a data engineer, Sarah Abdelhadi, a research associate, and Jordan Layton, a data scientist. We have several other colleagues here, one in the audience, and back in DC. Kind of thinking about, I'm new to the team. I've been here a year and a half about. And kind of thinking about this team, I think about the values of a data team. So thinking about our values, we really care about actionable data for internal use, collaboration with grantees to build usable tools and products, and continuous learning. I think that's a core value of a data team, to always be seeking feedback to improve what we're doing. We don't work on the ground. We're not in your shoes, we're not in your offices, and we want to learn how to use those tools, the tools that we're developing to better your work, to practice kind of continuous learning about the field from you all, and to help you do your work better. Kind of core activities of ODGA, if you're not familiar with LSC in the office, we're tasked with modernizing and streamlining the data collection and reporting practices. Those include kind of calculating the grantee awards that are formula grants, overseeing the GAR, which is our annual grantee activity report, and then analysis. You might be familiar with by the numbers. There's other additional analyses that go into the budget requests that we have to do every year, and other things that we do kind of on an ad hoc basis. In the future, we hope to do much more in this space. We also support LSC overall with oversight and government affairs work, and we're continually improving the reporting tools, our processes, our data pipelines, and whatnot. We also are seeking to improve access to data. We're designing research projects and studies and special initiatives. We're working with others to do that across the field. And we want to improve the availability of LSC data to be more open to researchers, to you all, really accessible to anyone who wants to learn more about the civil legal aid. We also want to assist grantees in building their capacity for using data and evaluation. We know everyone's at a different stage in their journey. Some people don't have a data team or data people. Some people have a whole team. We want to learn from what you're doing, and we want to help you at where you are at your journey. Some of that is to create new tools and products that we're going to talk about today, and then some of it's to provide technical assistance in other ways. So first, it's kind of helpful just to know what data we collect, if you're not familiar. We have the annual grantee activity report, fondly known as the GAR. That's the largest civil legal aid data collection. It's kind of aggregate data about case counts, open, closed, other types of services, outreaches, trainings. There's a lot of information on staffing, who staff are. Staffing changes over time that I'm really excited to dig into in the future, and also revenue and expenditures. We also have data that we collect from you for before there's a visit, for program quality visits for an LSC grantee. We get a lot of data, and we analyze that data for LSC staff before the visit, but we want to provide that data back to you in interesting mapping and things, and Jordan's going to talk about that today. We also have a project called the Civil Court Data Initiative, which collects civil court records that we're analyzing, standardizing, using in a variety of ways, and providing back to grantees to use in their work. And finally, we have administrative data sets, like many of you use for your data needs assessment or for your legal needs assessment, around the census, BLS data, other kinds of data that we can incorporate into the analyses of other GAR data, court data, things like that, just add to the value. So those are the kind of data we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to jump into a really exciting project, the Civil Court Data Initiative, and Dan's going to start us off talking about that.
Thanks, Holly. So the Civil Court Data Initiative is an initiative that we began about 4 years ago to see how we can use court records that come from various data sources, primarily from public court websites or from other court data sources, and try to use that information to help legal aid providers better target their limited resources and time where they can have the most impact. So we collect data from over 30 states, and because of the nature of court records being available, some at the state level, some at the county level, or another local level, where it says 30 states and you see the color-coded map up here, in some of these places, we just have one county. In Mississippi, we have found the one county where we have been able to find court records, and we collect that information, where in other places like Virginia or Pennsylvania, we're able to collect records from basically every county in those states. And this information includes data about these cases from the time that they're filed through when they are disposed and a judgment is entered. And we can use this information to better understand filing rates and how they vary across the country between urban and rural areas, between different demographic groups, and how it impacts the communities. We can also look at hearings, we can look at representation rates, and we can ultimately, in some cases, look at judgments as well. And ultimately, our goal is to produce new statistics about how representation in civil court impacts outcomes, so we can better advocate for legal aid and better help our partners around the country. And so there's kind of two areas where we use the data, and we're doing some pilot initiatives right now. One is kind of case activity monitoring, where we're really looking at individual cases and seeing how information about individual cases around their hearings, when they're happening, can better inform legal aid providers about where they can target their resources. And the other is more strategic planning, where we can zoom out and we can analyze thousands or millions of records together to derive new insights, such as what is the disparity between plaintiffs and defendants in eviction cases or debt collection cases. And so that's more of an aggregate analytical purpose. And so, the data that we're collecting can be incredibly messy. Many of the data sources that we're collecting from are based off of CMS systems where individuals in the courts enter information about cases. And there might be typos, there might be abbreviations. And so when we want to do analysis to look at who's involved in these cases and where they're happening, there is a tremendous amount of data cleaning that goes into our work. A lot of that happens to do with typos and party names. It also has to do with recoding case types, because eviction might be called something different in every jurisdiction around the country. So if we want to analyze those rates across counties, across states, we have to basically figure out what does every county in our data set call eviction or call debt collection, and recode that information so that we can derive these new statistics. And so those are kinds of some of the steps that we have to do. So even though we might be able to collect data, it could be a couple weeks, a couple of months, where we really have to dig into the information to understand some of these nuances that come from working with court records. So now we just have some examples of some of the things that we can do after we have collected and cleaned data. One thing that we've been doing for a while now is monitoring when eviction spikes happen. Basically, we can monitor trends on a weekly basis. And when we see a spike in evictions in a given county or a given service area, we reach out to the legal aid providers in that community and saying, hey, this is what we saw. This is kind of what the general trend has been in recent months, and here's this spike. And if we can figure out any more information, such as when a lot of those hearings might be for cases that were recently filed, we will provide that information to the legal aid providers as well. And so what you have here on the slide is just an example of an email that I sent many months ago, basically informing one legal aid provider around a spike in evictions in their community. So one thing that we have heard as we have talked to more legal aid providers is that there is often an individual in their organization that spends some amount of their time collecting court records manually. This might be going to the court website on a weekly basis and looking up all of the eviction cases that will be heard next week and pulling that information manually into a spreadsheet so you can check that against your previous clients to see who you might be able to reach out to help them in this upcoming case. And so one of the major benefits of the software that we've built to collect these records is that we can kind of replace some amount of that work. Instead of a paralegal or an administrative staff member collecting that information manually, which might just take a couple hours a week, but that adds up, week to week, month to month, we can provide that information to you on a regular basis so that you can kind of skip a step and move on to how you can put that data into action. So what you have here is just an example of a very basic spreadsheet that we send out to legal aid providers across Virginia. We've been working with all of the providers, both LSC funded and non-LSC funded, for about 9 months now, and we provide them with information every week as they've been trying to monitor an increase in evictions after various state level moratoria expired last year. And so here's some more examples. Specifically for one legal aid provider, for Eastern Virginia, you have an example of one of these spreadsheets we send out every week. And all you have here is the number of eviction hearings every day by county in the service area in Eastern Virginia. And it's color-coded in a way that makes it really jump out where the majority of those hearings are going to be. So if an attorney or a paralegal or some staff member wants to quickly figure out where they should be, especially in very large service areas that might have a lot of rural communities, they can use these spreadsheets to very quickly pinpoint where they might be able to allocate their time and resources to help people. We can also kind of zoom out. From more of a strategic level, we can analyze the data across thousands or millions of records to look at kinds of the differences and the disparities across communities. And we can see what kind of visible changes we can find in the court record based off a legal aid provider's advocacy or some kind of change in the laws or policies in a given community. And so I'm just gonna give kind of a high-level overview of a couple of these projects that we've done. And I wanna say, if you are interested in kind of working with us and seeing what we might be able to do for your program, it's okay. We will help you no matter where you are in your journey. And these examples here kind of run the gamut in terms of how much information legal aid providers kind of knew, what they knew about it, and how much kind of latitude we had to kind of analyze the data and pull out interesting facts that the legal aid provider didn't necessarily know about beforehand. So in Akron, Ohio, every couple of months, we send them eviction filing counts so that they can report to the media about the number of evictions that are proceeding through their courts. In that way, we are just providing truthful information about the number of cases so that the community journalists can be more informed about what's being processed in their courts. In Southern Virginia, a couple of months ago, Logan put together a memo about medical debt collection. And we were able to show some things that are probably pretty clear, that medical debt is pervasive. It doesn't necessarily cluster, at least at the county level, and it's kind of everywhere. But we were able to kind of look at the top filers in different communities. And when you looked at the top filers for medical debt across different counties, you saw many common ones, many of the largest hospitals in different communities, but you also saw some smaller providers, and that was able to inform them about some of these smaller actors that were using the courts for medical debt collection that they might want to target some of their outreach to in the future. In Chattanooga, I got a very specific question from a staff attorney where they said that they often had to counsel their clients on how much time they would normally have between when an eviction judgment is entered against them and when the sheriff would actually show up and remove them. And the attorney said that anecdotally, she knew that there was variation from zip code to zip code. If you lived in one zip code, it might be a week. In other communities, it might be 2 weeks or even more. And so we were able to analyze the data that we collect in Chattanooga to tell them the average and other kinds of statistics about set out times in Chattanooga so that they could better counsel their clients around how much time there might be at different points in their cases. In Cleveland and in Nashville, there are right to counsel programs that have been going on for a little bit or are just getting going. And the data that we collect is being used both in an operational sense in some cases, but also to evaluate this. So you can look at which individuals did get an attorney and how did their outcomes in representation and in outcomes vary from those that might not have had that, or compared to those who came through the courts before a right to counsel program was introduced. And then finally, in Richmond, the data has been used as part of petitions to prohibit writs of eviction during the pandemic, specifically in properties that are covered by the CARES Act. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Logan to give some more details.
Great. Thanks so much, Dan. Like Holly said, I am a data engineer here at LSC. In addition to helping Dan with and working with Dan and the rest of the data engineering team on a lot of the work that we've been doing thus far to collect and transform and make available to the legal aid community court data, we've also been doing some work to enhance that court data by supplementing auxiliary data sets. And then as well, as Dan kind of mentioned briefly there at the end, looking at analyzing the data ourselves to make the information and the insights that can be gleaned from that data more readily available to you all, even if you're less comfortable working with the actual data yourself. So that's kind of the bulk of what I'm going to be talking about over the next 10 minutes. To start with enhancing the data, if you will, incorporating auxiliary data sets. Dan mentioned there at the end the work that we've been doing with the CARES Act and incorporating CARES Act data into court data. To provide a little bit more background about that, that was actually some work that we did with Steve Fishback, who's in the audience, and he's over at the Virginia Poverty Law Center. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about this, we'd be happy to talk with you after. But just to provide kind of a high-level overview, there is nothing in the court docket in Virginia that indicates whether a plaintiff was or a filer was a CARES Act covered property, but this data does exist elsewhere. It's publicly available data, and so what we decided to do was take the court data as it existed, do a little bit of cleaning and transformation that Dan talked about in the first steps, and then essentially take this public CARES Act data and do sort of a matching between the names that exist in both data sets to provide that additional connection, right? So this is something that is not readily available in court data, but is something that we're working to do to improve the information that you might be able to obtain from it. This is something that we also do with registered business data. So in a number of different states, registered business data is made public. You can obtain information about all of the companies that are permitted to do business in a particular state, as well as the addresses where they are registered at, and you can essentially take the court data and enhance it through looking at parent corporations, things like that. So this is our way of essentially taking court data as it exists in isolation and improving upon it and improving the information that might be able to be gleaned from it. To move into how we analyze court data and what we're looking at and improve the information that you might be able to obtain from it, there are two areas where we're generally looking at how we obtain this information, if you will. The first is answering a specific research question. So when we're looking to obtain information, provide an analysis, someone from the legal aid community, perhaps a grantee or someone else, might come to us and ask us a question along the lines of, what are the specific, what does the data look like in these 4 counties in my jurisdiction? And that's something that we're happy to provide insight about. It might take us a little bit longer than just providing you all with the data, but if you're not comfortable looking at it and analyzing it yourself, that's something that we're happy to provide insight about. Something else that we're also doing in addition to this is looking at just providing a terse, high-level overview of evictions in a particular state. So we've generated these statewide eviction memos, which we generated these about 6 months ago, and they're constantly updated each week. We have them in 20 states, and you can take a look at the QR code here to see if we have your state. If we don't, we would be happy to chat with you afterwards about how we can get some version of these to you. But just in taking a look at the data that we currently have, these were the 20 states for which we could actually generate full statewide eviction memos. This is something that's meant to kind of mirror our more interactive components of the publicly available data that we have. So something like, for those of you that are familiar with our LSC tracker, this is sort of a static version of that might be a little bit different from, in terms of use case. It might be something that it's intended to be something that you can take, print off, download, print off, and take into a meeting with somebody working in the court system, in government, perhaps the executive director at your organization, somebody that you don't want to necessarily provide them with a URL to an interactive website, but instead just provide them with a high-level overview of the information that we have. As Holly mentioned at the beginning, we're always looking to improve how we, the information that we provide. That extends to these as well. These are always a work in progress. So if you look at it and there's something for your state that you would like to see that's not in here, please let us know and we'd be happy to chat more about that. The one final thing that I'll say about the analyses that we do is essentially looking at the data in aggregate, the data that we do have, and then comparing that with the local trends that we might see in a particular state. A good example of this is Indiana's eviction ceiling laws, which have recently been implemented. Indiana's eviction ceiling laws have gone into place, I believe it was over the summer, where tenants can appeal to have their case sealed. It's not automatically sealed, like in the District of Columbia is one example, Arizona is another, where these records are automatically sealed. In Indiana, you do have to actually apply to have it sealed. So an analysis that we're currently looking at is understanding what the universe of data here is that actually can be of cases that are eligible to be sealed, if you will. So that's all I'll really say about the analysis work that we're doing. I will say that we've talked a lot about court data over the past 15 minutes, and I do want to say that there are some considerations with how we use this court data. This is something that we as a team, all of us up here and then the rest of the folks over at ODGA are constantly thinking about. And components of that are, we are continuously updating the data to ensure that all of the records are as accurate as possible. We recollect records at 1 week, 1 month, 6 months, a year out from when the case was originally filed. And then in addition, we can do that on an ad hoc basis if there's a specific ask. So we're continuously updating the data to ensure that it actually reflects what is inherent in the court docket. Beyond that, we've talked about some of the ways that we clean data, the ways that we enhance it. It's important to recognize that we always maintain the original data for reference. So we never make a decision to transform data without actually tracing how that is, what actions have been taken to improve usability, if you will. We also are constantly reviewing the data that we do have for accuracy. That's something that we're constantly in meetings discussing is, how could this data be, are there any inaccuracies in the data? When we do find inaccuracies, how can we correct them and make sure that everything is up to the proper standard? And then beyond that, we're always documenting our processes so that we can share them with you all. And we're more than happy, and we do make that information available when necessary. Another component of this is sharing the data. So while individual records, as they exist online, are public, we do take considerations when providing this data in aggregate. And we're conscious about who we share this data with to minimize the disclosure of personally identifiable information and just generally make sure that the data is being shared in an accountable way, in addition to being, holding ourselves accountable. We want to make sure that there's accountability when sharing that information as well. So I'll just close out and discuss some of the key priorities that we have moving forward into 2023. The first one is obviously to expand our coverage and data available. So, Dan mentioned at the beginning that we have data available in over 30 states. As I mentioned before, we have data that we're confident speaking about statewide levels in about 20 of those. We're always happy to, or we're always looking to increase the data that we have and expand on that. We also have a new updated tracker for those of you that are familiar with our old tracker. That's going to be getting an update soon, or is in the process of getting an update and will be released soon. That's going to have representation and default rates as well. And so please be in touch with us. Reach out to us if you'd like, and we can provide you with that URL once that information goes live. And then just as a final note, we're always looking to build connections with you all. So I know I've said it probably about 5 or 6 times already, but we're really looking to speak with you all and hear your thoughts about all of the work that we're doing here, and would love to collaborate and do anything like that. So yeah, with that, I'll pass it along to Sarah.
Hello, as Logan said, I'm Sarah Abdelhadi. I'm a research associate with ODGA. I feel like this is really close to my face. All right, so we're going to talk about the LSC Laws Database, which you might have heard some fanfare about in 2021, but it's still ongoing. So our first eviction laws database came as a result of the LSC eviction study. We received funding from Congress just before the pandemic started to conduct an eviction study to better understand the way that law and kind of the legal procedures associated with eviction impact outcomes and impact the work that all of you do every day. So a big deliverable of this eviction study, which will be wrapping up later this year, is the eviction laws database. We worked closely with the Center for Public Health Law Research team at Temple University's Beasley School of Law. They're a really great organization. If you've not heard of them, check out their website. To build what was at the time the largest and most expansive database of eviction laws and procedures in the US. So our database covers about 40 different components of eviction laws and procedures for all 50 states, DC, and the 8 territories and freely associated states that are served by LSC providers. And it includes local eviction laws data for 30 cities as well. So this covers everything from timelines for notices and for summonses. It includes, different reasons for eviction, masking laws, you name it, it's probably in our database. So this data is current as of January 1st, 2021. It was a point-in-time data set, and since then we have laid out a plan to continue this data set beyond the eviction study. So once the eviction study wraps up later this year, the database will continue on. We think that context is really important for data. Having data on things is great, but you need context to understand what it means and to apply it in real life situations. So we are actually merging the existing laws database with the Civil Court Data Initiative to provide context for that eviction data that we have. So I'll talk a little bit more about our future state plans in a second, but I will just jump over to our website to show you where you can find our old version of the eviction laws database. So this is the LSC homepage. So if you want to find the eviction laws database as it currently stands, you can pop over to initiatives and just drop on down here to the study webpage. So you can find some of our other components here as well, but you can drop right down to eviction laws database, click on the link, and it will take you here. So we've got some background info on the database and kind of how it came together. The state and territory data set is separate from the local data set, so I'll show you both of those quickly. For both data sets, you can find helpful information. You can download the data as an Excel file, see the protocol and code book, and use those as needed. So both data sets are set up the same way. You can kind of click through these various questions that we use to kind of interrogate the law and code the various jurisdictions in response. So you can click through and just kind of interact with the map and see I'm not clicking very exciting ones, huh? You can see which states or jurisdictions fall into each category. So there are quite a few questions here. I won't go through all of them. I'll leave that for you to explore. If you want to see information for a specific state, you can hop over to Profiles. And you can see all of the states, or you can search for a specific one. So I'll do District of Columbia. So you can see the entire profile for that state. And if you look at a given question, it includes the legal citations, so you can actually see what evidence we're using to answer those questions that we're asking of the law. And there's also pop-ups with additional information if something is different or just something we want to call your attention to. This iteration of the database was current as of January 1st, 2021. As I'm sure all of you know, there were a lot of different rules in play due to COVID at that time, so our future iterations of the database will look a bit different. So those are current of this time, and a lot of the notes that you'll see are related to COVID-related differences in the law. And so the local data set looks a little different just because it is cities instead of states, but it works exactly the same way. I invite you all to check it out if you have time. It's really interesting, at least from my end. I'm not an attorney, so I think you guys know the law better than I do, but you can learn a lot about how things operate differently in different states. And I think that's something we found has been most useful to folks who are working with this database. Getting to see those state by state or territory by territory differences, and either think of things they can implement in their own jurisdiction or service area, things they can work towards, or just doing different comparisons. So this data has been used by the ACLU, it's been used by the American Bar Association, it's been used by Eviction Lab and many others to sort of do those comparisons and see where we can help improve access to justice when it comes to eviction. So as I mentioned, our future state for the laws database, we're combining it with the Civil Court Data Initiative. So later this year, we'll be rolling out a new website that includes, as both Dan and Logan mentioned, we'll have an updated tracker, access to a lot of eviction data, but we'll also include what we hope will be a more useful setup for the laws data. So we'll have kind of a policy summary on every state page and for a lot of county pages as well, that summarizes some key laws that are in effect in that area. We are also hoping to have downloadable data sets that will track laws over time, so you can, maybe you want to see what's going on with filing fees in a certain jurisdiction. You'll be able to see, starting from the time of our first data set, which is January 1st, 2021, moving forward, how the laws have changed over time. We know certain jurisdictions change a lot, some don't change for decades at a time. So it's really interesting to be able to track those laws over time and to make comparisons with the core data to see if and how those changes in policy have impacted outcomes for eviction cases. So we are actually managing this data set in-house now, whereas before we were working with our partners at Temple. And we are working very closely with people like you, local experts who know the law really well and can help us make sure we're presenting things accurately and currently. We are also connecting with other organizations that are either collecting this sort of information or using it. So organizations like the National Low Income Housing Coalition have a somewhat similar data set, and so we're working with them so we're not duplicating efforts. We've slimmed down the questions a little bit so that they're more targeted to what we've heard. We've gotten feedback from folks in the field, so more targeted to the sorts of information they find most useful. And we are, hoping to track things kind of on an ongoing basis to make sure, it's not in point in time, it's as accurate as possible and current as possible. So that's what we've got coming up. Yeah. And now I'll pass it to Jordan to share some other tools we have.
Hi. So I don't have slides. That's the only slide for me. I'm going to go to the web and show some stuff that we've created. Some of the things I'm going to show you are publicly available. Some of the things I'm going to show you are internal LSC tools and resources, but that I want to show you because I think they may be illustrative of the types of things we can do for you, either repurpose them and make them external facing, or at least demonstrate the types of skills and technologies that we put into place and that could be used for you as well. So as I show you these things, I invite you to write down any thoughts you have, like that could be really useful for me, or I really like that if only it was a little different. And ultimately, as my colleagues have said, we want to get your involvement, not just right now, but over time, so that we can make things that are really addressing the data needs that you have and the data questions that you have. The email address we'll put at the end, but for the sake of repetition, is datateam@lsc.gov. datateam@lsc.gov, and send in your ideas and your thoughts, because we rarely get it right the first time, but over time we get things that we think are hopefully useful. So here we go. We're going to dive right. I'm going to pick up where Sarah was, which is on the LSC website. I'm going to show you one thing that's posted there. One of the things we know you're engaged in is doing needs assessments, planning, trying to pull together census, demographic, and economic data. Some grantees and legal service providers are very adept at navigating the census website and knowing which variables to find. Others really are not, and it can be kind of confusing. So at the very, very, very top of the LSC website, under research and data, the first thing you'll find after this brief introduction is Census Data for Grantees Interactive Tool. This isn't particularly new, but we find that people don't always know about it. And so this is something we created with a curated set of data, pulls directly from the Census API, data variables that have to do with legal needs and legal services. So here, for example, I'm not going to spend too deep of time on any one of these resources, but just so you know that they exist. Let's say I'm going to pick a grantee here, pick some, you might not be able to see my mouse, so in the bottom left, I'm just picking a few different geographic scopes, like county level, county subdivisions. There's different years. And then here's the list of different data sets that we're pulling in. So poverty, different poverty level thresholds, demographics of the 100% and 125% poverty level, access considerations like the languages of people who have limited English proficiency, people without internet and so forth, rent burden, that kind of thing. All right, so if I were to pick something like, let's say without internet, and you could kind of, I click the button below that drop down, you can kind of see our thoughts on why do we think this is relevant to the work that you do. So here, talking about increased e-filing and self-help forms and these kind of things, and it's important to know, are there areas that are really not going to be able to access these online resources, right? So let's say we're going to get the data here. Right now it's going to pull it in from the Census API, and here we've got the number and percent at different income brackets. I'll link down at the bottom if you want to go directly to the data, census data site. So we've got county subdivisions got pulled in as well, and you could download it and sort it and all that. Or you can we can map it over here. So looks like I picked western side of Arizona. So we do something like this, the percent that don't have internet access, right? So about half the people in the very low income don't have internet access at all, cell phones or broadband, so in this county. So that's something that I invite you to go explore, and as my colleagues have said, send us your feedback, your ideas, what would be helpful. Now, one thing this doesn't really do a whole lot is compare this with your case data. I'm going to show you something we've been doing for program quality visits that gets into that a bit more, and in the future iterations of this tool, we look at more incorporating case data, trends over time, more data points and so forth. So we welcome your feedback on that. So I'm going to hop over to a different site. Now this site, I have it here. You can see it here, www.lscdataease.org. Now, at the moment, there's not a whole lot here that's publicly posted for grantees. These resources here are available, but mostly what I'll show you is internal. So a lot of our internal data, dashboards and maps and things like that are here on this site. And so this is just so you can see, if you go there right now, you'll see some of these. Here, for example, in the middle, Logan mentioned these eviction filings. You could go here and find them. So this is just, I'm not gonna show you how to get to this because this is internal. It's sort of internal. It's when we go on a program quality visit, if you've had one in the last year or so, you would have received, someone in your organization would have received this deck of maps and tables and charts that pull together census data, pull together the case data, and provide it in some of these ways. So, tables that break down percent of cases in rural areas, non-rural areas. Some maps like, let's see here. So there we go. We're looking mapping overall cases per 10,000 eligible population, or let's say for each county, what's the percent of cases in the whole service area compared to the percent of the eligible population, some of these types of measurements. And so these are maps that can be explored, and you can dig down into the county subdivision level and look at hotspots or maybe areas that need to be served a bit more, a bit less, or things like that. And breaking down by different things, staff, PAI. I'm not going to go into all these different tables that break down, what's happening in the different counties, and you can sort them. And some other charts. Let's say, what are the languages of the limited English-speaking population? What's shown in the cases? Here's another one: race, ethnicity categories from cases, staff, and poverty population. So these are some of the things that we've been doing for program quality visits. Now, in the future, it would be really great, and we would really like to democratize this a bit more so that, let's say, you might hypothetically upload a data set, and we could pull the census data in, and you could get these types of maps and graphs when you need them, not just when LSC goes and happens to do a visit. But this just demonstrates some of the types of tools we put together for those visits and that we hope to expand access to in the future. So another thing that I'll point out here is, so internally we take all this grantee activity report data, and people want to look at that in a bunch of different ways and see trends. So we have dozens of these dashboards where we're pulling together trends and what's happening with cases. I mean, these are by problem category, by code, by PAI, demographics, and all sorts of stuff. So we're not going to dig into these, but the point is that we've talked about this for a while, we want to take some of this and make some external facing for grantees, some dashboards that maybe meet your needs, get your data back to you. It could be tables, it could be dashboards, and part of that is just figuring out, we don't assume that it's the same thing that we use internally, but we could certainly do the same kind of thing and slice it up in different ways and get to you the grant activity report data in some way that's helpful for you for seeing maybe how you situated compared to national medians or some kind of thing like that. And so these are just examples of different ways that we do this internally and that could be inspiration for the future. Now lastly, I'll point to, so this is similar to the eviction handouts that Logan mentioned. These are some state profiles. These are also available publicly. This is not for every state, but we started pulling together census data, justice gap data, housing data that we have, and some of the GAR data, these kind of things. And we're creating these profiles. This was for our government relations, public affairs folks, that they could then print to like a one-pager. I have to adjust those margins, but they could print it, like, look like this, and print it out, and have a QR code to bring them back to the web version. And so these are some of the things that we are starting to pull together, and it's all very automated. All the things I'm showing you, we're working in cloud services, we're building APIs, we've got different programming languages we're doing, and so the short of it is that we can pull together a lot of different tools and technologies to create things that really, in the end, don't take a whole lot of time and that can be produced for a lot of places all at once. So in the future, we might want to do, let's say, have a one-pager that's for all the congressional districts, and that could be something that's rather automated. It doesn't necessarily have to be like, this is LSC grantees in this district. It could be something more generic, like that you would then be able to print out and bring for the sake of education and showing what the legal needs are and things like that. So like I said, it just comes down to what's helpful. And as someone said I listened to an audiobook recently, it said basically, if you want innovation, tell me where you want to go, but you don't have to tell me how to get there. And I think that's part of our goal here, is to understand where do you need to go and what are the questions that you're trying to answer. And then we have a lot of different things we can do and tools we can pull together and pull from APIs and do all this stuff that maybe we can help fill in some of those gaps and help get you at least part of the way there. So I think we're probably over time on presenting, so I'll just end it there on my part.
I think now we want to open it up and kind of hear from you and learn from you, and then we'll share kind of an end point. But I think we're going to give Lynn a mic. Logan, do you want to give her that one? And just ask you, what are you guys doing? What from this presentation seemed interesting and exciting? Jordan got the fun demo part for sure, and showing all of the court data and the laws database. And so I hope that you're excited and energized and have ideas, and we'd love just to hear from you.
I have a question.
Sure.
If I understand you correctly, the data that you gather, apart from the demographic data, is data that the courts collect and publish on their websites. That's correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you ever find that certain courts or certain jurisdictions are not collecting data that you think they could be or should be collecting? And are you in a position to, this may be naive of me, but are you in a position to say to them, hey, we've made this observation that we would recommend that you collect blah, blah, blah. Does that happen?
I think a lot of people have tried that over the past 5 years, and I'm not sure that they're finding a lot of headway. So I think there's a lot of organizations who are definitely trying to go the route of talking to the courts about how to improve their systems. It's not all the court's fault, right? There's a lack of investment and other kinds of challenges that they're dealing with. I think on our end, we're trying to give the data to people on the ground who are going to be most effective at that advocacy, and also share with the organizations who are doing advocacy directly with the courts. So in some ways, our relationships with the court are not strong enough, and that's not really LSC's place to be doing some of that advocacy work. But there is certainly a lot they could collect in different ways and more. Yep.
Thank you. Impressive work, by the way. I'm from Community Legal Aid SoCal in Orange County, and we're also in the process of identifying all the data points that's available to us and trying to figure out what kind of insight we can get out of them. I would be very interested in perhaps comparing what we're seeing in the ground versus the census data and how it's changing. Is there a way to, I don't know what's going on, but would any of these, is there a possibility of perhaps getting API access to any of these data sets to, do comparisons on our end? And as you guys, the data grows on your end, that just becomes automatically available to us on our end.
I really like this question about API access. We built some APIs for like internal kind of passing data between our tools and stuff. And certainly, there's not right now an API would point you to a public API, but I think there may be some interest in that we would need to gauge of what should be available on an API, but not right now. Right now, what I would say is, at risk of getting in trouble from my boss, I would say that, you know, it really doesn't take me very long to produce these kind of maps and graphs for program quality visits, where that combines case data, like a year of case data, anonymized case data with some of the census data, and it's something that we could look at doing, you know, in some cases outside of a program quality visit, like, and pulling a resource like that together that kind of helps do some of these sorts of things. So it'd be like kind of an ad hoc thing, but as I'm saying, in the future, we want to get to a point where it's like you could, in your use case, just dive in and either get the data from an API or upload your data, you know, to a secure place and then get the maps or the graphs back or that kind of thing. But we're not quite at that point yet.
I do think that is, as we gauge interest here, this is all about priorities, right? We all have limited time and limited resources, but we do think that that is a resource that should be available and that we can save a lot of time, right? A lot of this is coded and is relatively easy if the data is submitted in the same format. And so we are hoping that that's a service that we can provide that isn't just available when you have a visit. We know we can't visit every grantee all the time, but this data should be available. And so thinking about if this is something that's useful, let's make it available and let's think of a way that you can just do the request, fill it out, tools are provided here in Access, and how should they be different for you, right? What else can we do? So let's connect later.
So when you have a program quality visit, I know there's a variety of factors that you all review for the grantees. And one of those things, example, is the number of cases per 10,000 poor people. Is there any way that you can have data available that shows us the ways that you review us for program quality so we're looking at it ahead of time, or we're able to monitor our own progress based on more updated information? For example, that number for pro bono, for a limited service, for extensive service, the more updated you have it, the more we can see how we are doing before you have to come in and then look through it.
It's a great point. And I think some of those grantee-facing tools that we have access to annually, and Jordan and Sarah kind of producing these dashboards from new GAR data, making those kind of grantee-facing so that you can see them and use them. And, you know, I'm going to speak out of turn a little bit, but I don't think OPP wants to be looking at things that they're not sharing with you, right? It would be great if we weren't getting people in trouble, right? You should be able to see things and anticipate and have a much more constructive conversation than the gotcha moment, right? And so that's really what we'd like to do, is give that data back to you.
Right, and I would just say that when either OPP or OCE goes through, what we didn't discuss is the risk assessment tool that also ODGA put together, which has about 40 different factors. That is really the guiding instrument for us in terms of where OPP plus all of the intelligence that our program counsel and our fiscal compliance analysts have, and that is how we come up. I get what you're saying about, but I want to be clear that case closures is not the only criterion we look at to look at program quality. It's just one factor. It's one of them, but I wouldn't say it's determinative in any way, shape, or form. So just so I want to make that clear. Joyce, I don't know if you had anything to add.
I think the only thing I would add is that when we are on a visit, our team will go over what we looked at, why we looked at, and what some of those outcomes are, and the things that we're looking at that might need improvement or attention from your teams.
So the statewide eviction filings, I was looking at the website and I don't see California. Is there a reason for that?
Yes, that's because we don't have access to that information. I mean, California has implemented eviction ceiling for, I think, a couple of years now, and that greatly limits the availability of the data that we would need to be able to produce those memos. I know that there has been some work done out at UC Berkeley around collecting that information from across the state, but at this point, in the way that we normally collect records, we just don't have access to California, unfortunately.
For the census tracking tool, I'm looking at it right now. Is there a way to select LSC service areas? I see it's like blank and you can't check it. I think for like most managing attorneys that I work with, it would be nice to be like legal assistants of Western New York are 14 counties. It pops up for them really quick. Is there a way to do that, or am I missing it?
We're talking about this tool right here?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. So you're going to pick this drop down here is going to be the LSC grantees.
Mm-hmm.
So you can pick whichever one of these you want. But sorry, what did it?
And then underneath it says LSC service areas.
Oh,
and you
I see.
can't click that one.
Yeah, so the reason for that is because we're here on 2021 data. Now, we're a bit behind on receiving the tabulation. We get hundreds of custom tables from the Census Bureau, all sorts of tables for the LSC service areas. And the latest we've received, I believe, would be 2019, actually. So, here we go. It says right here, LSC service area geographic scope only available through 2019. So they're behind from all the COVID stuff and everything. They're behind, and so we don't have all those quite yet. So if we were to go to 2019, then here you can select LSC service area. So it just grays out if it wasn't available for that year. That's what's going on. Mm-hmm.
Going to go to somebody who has an interest.
Hi, I'm going to ask a question that's maybe not about initiatives, but more about LSC's, I guess, commitment. It's very obvious you're very committed to having a sound data team to do these things. It's one thing to have a team, and it's another to talk to an organization that maybe doesn't have somebody inside doing that work, or working with a consultant on the outside that can help, I guess, navigate some of these things. And I guess my question's really related to how you use these tools to help build data literacy among your grantee organizations, because once you hand off a tool, do they know how or what to do with it in a meaningful way? I guess is kind of what my question would really be.
It's a great comment. Thanks, Kelly. I think one thing we can do better about is perhaps preparing something about how to use. Maybe it's videos, maybe it's more one-on-ones. I think the people who have shown interest kind of reach out typically to Jordan sometimes, and they're like, oh my gosh, this thing that I just found. And then we can have a conversation and be more helpful. But you're absolutely right that a lot of tools should have more corresponding materials to help out. I think also as we build things that maybe we are grantee facing on purpose, we can work with different people to better understand what that should look like. I know I worked at a legal aid organization for over 10 years, and data literacy and trying to make sure that staff attorneys were accessing different kinds of information, and managing attorneys and supervising attorneys, and they need to know different things. And so I think we can help and be more thoughtful about that in the future.
Okay, it doesn't work if I do that. I get rid of the sound, but also the volume. With the census data, I live in Georgia. We have 159 counties. They're very small, but when we have rural counties, the census doesn't pick up a lot of that data. When I'm looking at a map there, what happens to those counties? Does it just display as 0? Does it display as not available? Am I going to get a giant gap in everything?
Yeah, well, it'll show on those maps, it'll show gray and not available. So that's going to happen for a lot of these rural counties, depending on the variable. And so the best scenario is to use the 5-year census data, not the 1 year. That'll open up a lot of variables but if you're getting into something very specific, like, the percent of kids under 5 who are from Somalia or something, it's not gonna be available in a lot of cases. And so there's nothing quite we can solve about that. But if you're ever like looking at this tool and it's not clear or it's confusing, or the user interface, like please let us know, because we could always use more user testers, and and I'm I'm happy to change it because we develop all this stuff in-house, so we can fix things, and so let us know.
Any other questions?
Well, I think we just put up a slide. We really want to think about building a community of practice of data people in civil legal aid. And so later, we're going to upload this deck to Whova. There'll be a sign up for that so we can start sharing, right? I always felt like a silo. I had a small team at a legal aid organization, but some people have one person. Sometimes you have half of an FTE, right? And I think there's a lot of sharing and a lot of hacks, right? We can cut some time in learning, everybody learning the same thing over and over and over, and connect people who are doing similar kinds of work, using similar case management systems, and help each other. And so we're really hoping to help build that community of practice. Our email is here for the data team. We're going to stick around. We know sometimes it's easier to have informal conversations one-on-one, and so we want to leave time for that. But we hope you'll reach out and let us know how things can be helpful. Or, you know what, none of these were helpful. Here's what I really need. Tell us. I can't promise that we can do it. I can't promise that we'll have enough staff to get it to you right away. But I can promise that we're listening and that we'll try to plan for things. And I do think LSC has made a conscious investment, and we're seeking private funding to do some of these projects to really try and use data to inform and help improve legal services. And so let us be your partner. And thanks for coming.